I kind of give a lot of talks associated with mental health in athletes and sort of how people can understand the mental health piece of athletes. So I'm going to kind of sort of talk a little bit about the generalities associated with just mental health and athletics, and also what you can identify in certain athletes that you're working with. And then I'm going to talk about the injury piece. So I'm hoping to get through to everything because I feel like it was a lot more information than I thought. But we are, just to give you a background of what I do, Elite Psychology and Wellness is a private practice in Scottsdale. We are a group of trained, experienced sports counselors and mental health counselors. So we marry both and integrate both the mental health and the sports performance piece. We do a lot of mental skills, coping skills, performance skills, but we do a lot of the injury work because that's a lot of what athletes are facing when they come to us. So I'm not going to go through all of these stats, but if you can see some of these statistics, mental health is important when we talk about athletes because it is a real thing. So many non-athletes probably always are saying, why are athletes even affected by anything? They make millions of dollars, they're, on TV, like what does that mean? There's a lot of stress and a lot of pressures that go along with athletics and with being an athlete. And we talk about our student athletes, our university athletes, our high school level athletes. We are also seeing high levels of stress within them as well. And then that increases to mental health issues such as depression, anxiety, trauma, PTSD, all of that. And when you add the injury component into it, you're really starting to see a lot of mental health issues that can go along with that recovery part. So just a couple of things on here. We do see 30% of student athletes reporting feeling overwhelmed in the past month. They have burnout, they have exhaustion, they have depression. All of that is leading to mental health issues, but 10% of all college athletes are actually getting the support that they need. And so that's kind of the piece where we come into play and where you come into play in terms of understanding mental health in athletics and then referring to people that can help support them. So just to give you a broad foundation, mental health, what is that and why is that important? Mental health is our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It's the way that we handle things that come at us, right, in life. When we have increased stressors, increased demands, we see a lot more mental health issues going on. So when we have an athlete who is suffering with something, be it an injury, be it a relationship, be it, a performance issue, we start to see a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, a lot of ways in which they can't handle that emotional component or that emotional response. I am going to talk to you very briefly about athlete identity because it goes kind of hand in hand with sport injury, and I wanted you guys to just understand a little bit when I talk about this piece. Athlete identity is real. It is a real thing that athletes are, they're perfectionists, they're motivated, they're really high-level achievers, they set their goals, they get to those goals. All of those things are wonderful because those are the things that make an athlete, right, and make them successful. What winds up happening is that we wind up seeing an athlete just having an athlete identity associated with their sport. Meaning that when you look at this pie chart, you are only seeing that they are looking at themselves related to their sport. It's how important the sport becomes to them and basically makes them who they are, and how much to the degree of which they identify with that sport or with themselves being an athlete. What contributes to that is really the internal perceptions that they have about themselves and their sport, but also the external stuff that they're getting, meaning the feedback that they get from their coach, feedback that they get from their parents, let's say, and then that becomes really like, I have to be the best soccer player I can be, or I am just a basketball player. I no longer really have time for all of these other aspects of my life. And what that does sometimes is when we see high levels of athlete identity, usually are connected to your team. You're usually performing really well. Like that is really great because they're really motivated, right? And they're dedicated. However, it also becomes the piece that starts to break down when they get injured. And when they get injured, they start to say, I no longer have that identity. I no longer am a part of that environment. And now we start to see an increase in that depression, increase in that anxiety. And I'm going to talk a lot about increase in a fear response, which is like a PTSD response when they return back to play. That can all lead to exhaustion and burnout, but really what that is doing is causing them to sort of have to make a decision now about how to balance their identity and what that looks like. Because if you have not given the time or the energy to other areas of your life, typically they don't know how to do that. They don't know how to kind of go back in and sort of say, well, now I no longer can play my sport, or now I'm at a place of hiatus. How do I go and like connect with my family? How do I go and connect with friends? Like, what do I do? Because I've never done that before. And the hobbies part is the biggest piece. It's like, I am just an athlete. I don't have any other hobbies. So we work a lot with athletes on coming up with more healthier ways of like creating an athlete identity. But again, as I talk a little bit about injury, this is really important because it's going to come into play. So we see a lot of injury associated with concussion injury, like orthopedic injury, like musculoskeletal injury, like ACLs and all of those tears and all of that. There's a little different ways in which we treat different parts of injury when they come to us, but for the most part, this is every injury that an athlete is dealing is how we're gonna approach it from a mental perspective. So just some stats, up to 50% of athletes experience depression and anxiety after injury, so it is super common. I kind of think of it like if anybody broke their ankle or had surgery, you're always kind of feeling a little bit down. Even when we have a cold, we kind of feel a little bit isolated. So if you can think of it that way, you can think of the magnitude or the impact that an injury would cause someone whose whole world is performing in athletics, right? Higher level of anxiety during preseason will also equal higher levels of injury. So when we have athletes who are anxious or hesitating during preseason, we typically can see that will create higher levels of injury during season. Their mental game may not connect with their actual physical performance. And then 75% of all injuries associated with high levels of anxiety and fear to return to play. That is the massive piece that we'll be talking about, because we see depression. That's pretty common when you're injured or when you're like not feeling well. But for the most part, athletes are having a fear response to get back to return to play. And that is what we are actually working on when we say the mental game or the response piece. And then obviously mental health issues can prolong recovery, right? And that has an impact on the physical recovery as well sometimes. So this is like what you're really truly seeing is stress and anxiety, fear response, and then this lack of confidence, which is all going to possibly create a common relapse situation where, injury, again, is common after they return to play if they're not ready to go back in. When I talk about lack of confidence, it's sort of this piece in the body. So the body isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing for me, and so now I'm fearful that if I go back in, the body's still not going to be doing that. One example of that is concussion. Typically, we have athletes who will automatically or unconsciously sort of start to not put themselves in a play because they're afraid that that play is the play that could potentially hit their heads again. One of the things in which I talk a lot about is I have this bum ankle, and a lot of times when I don't have my brace on, my 3-year-old tells me, "Mommy, run with me," and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I can't do that," and I don't put pressure on my ankle because I'm afraid that if I do, I'm going to go ahead and re-injure that. That is not confident in my body, right? I'm not feeling good about something, so I'm hesitating to actually do it. You'll see that with your athletes. Okay, so after a sports injury, isolation typically leads to depression, right? We see that mostly, like I give a lot of examples of concussion because it's kind of like they are super isolated, but that doesn't necessarily mean that anybody else can also feel that isolation because they're not playing with their team, they're not practicing, they're not in their daily routine, right? They're not able to physically do what they usually do, and that can cause that depression, and that can also cause that anxiety related to, am I going to get back to this? Again, fear is a big, huge component, but shame is also a piece that also affects them as well and increases mental health component to how they're feeling, meaning that they're not recovering fast enough. Their body's not recovering fast enough, and then maybe they're afraid that they're going to lose their spot on the team, and they're starting to feel afraid, they're starting to feel shameful, they're starting to feel like, they're not going to be participating or giving back to their team in the way that they should. And then obviously that decrease in physical activity always kind of can create a depression or a mood-related issue because we're not physically getting those endorphins and doing all of those things that we normally do. I talk about invisible injury or prolonged injury, meaning that piece of that they are not feeling that they're recovering as quickly as they should. When we talk a lot about invisible injury, we use that with concussion work because a lot of times when you have a broken ankle, people know that you have a broken ankle. You're on crutches, you have a cast, it's visible, right? And they may see that progression to recovery. When you have a concussion, there's no signs really or no things that show that you're suffering on the inside. And so we get a lot of concussed athletes who are very much shameful because they are not feeling like they're recovering as quickly as they should. So we see individual sports athletes will be at higher risk for some mental health issues versus the group sports. That just typically means that, again, they're not as connected to the group. They're not gaining a lot of social support and they're being more isolated. More severe injuries will also lead to more depression and anxiety and fear. I think that might be why I sometimes use certain injuries as examples. Because they typically, if they're really intense and it's almost like a career-ending situation, that is going to cause a lot of mental health issues and a lot of fear. And then decreased psychological readiness to return to sport increases that re-injury, but increases that avoidance behavior. That's what I was talking about, where people are like not consciously going into a play or not doing certain things because they're avoiding those behaviors so that they don't get injured again, even though that might not be likely, that might not be the case. So just to give you guys a foundation of sort of what we do, a lot of times after injury, there's things that are called thinking traps that can occur. So catastrophizing, all or nothing thinking, overgeneralization, personalization, and emotional reasoning. I'm going to go into a few of these so you guys get an idea of what it is. It might be something, these are things that we're going to use with the athletes in like the sports psychology session, but these are things you might actually hear your athletes saying when you're training them. So catastrophizing, it's like the injury will end my career. They may say that to you, and you may say, although challenging, many athletes have recovered from this type of injury. I have seen athletes recover from this type of injury. What you're doing is kind of not minimizing, you're neutralizing that extensive thought that is basically fear-based, right? And anxiety-based. So here's another one that you'll see a lot, all or nothing thinking. If I can't play at my level before I got injured, there is no point in me trying at all. It's like, it's natural to face setbacks during recovery. Even small progress is a step forward, and you can set small achievable goals. So you're kind of neutralizing everything that they're coming at you with, because I like to not say necessarily making it positive. I like to say like balanced and neutral, because when you say negative and positive, you're still sitting in those two like extreme camps, but rather come sit in the middle with me, and kind of that sort of starts to deregulate the mood and the emotion, and sort of starts to calm the mind so that the body can start to get calm, and then you could do what you need to do to recover them. Overgeneralization, I didn't reach my goal today, I will fail at everything. It sounds like my toddler. It's kind of like those kind of extreme cases. Recovery has its ups and downs, right? And it's not every day is going to be perfect, but you're doing what you need to be doing. We're working towards that goal. And then showing them the stats, showing them where they started from, showing them the recovery piece and what their body is doing, that can typically help them. They like tangible things, right? But sitting in this neutral area can be super, super helpful for them, because what their brain is starting to do right now, again, it's that fear response. It's like, I'm scared of what was, that I can't ever get back to it, and I'm really scared of what is going to be, and if I'm ever going to get there again. And you've got to kind of help support, or we help support them sitting in that middle zone. And I know they talk about some of that stuff with you guys, so those are some tips that could be very helpful. So just a little bit of a visual kind of is like accepting reality. This is where we're at right now. You have gotten an injury. You have gotten injured. Let's not worry about the past. Let's not worry about the future, but let's focus on the present. and kind of accepting the reality of where they're at. Focus on the controllables. They cannot control the injury. They cannot control that, like, someone is going to talk smack about them or say that they're not recovering the right way. But what they can control is the way they perceive that, the way they respond to that, and the way that they think about those things. And that goes into positive self-talk, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about because that's a really powerful one that we do a lot and we work on a lot. And then developing a roadmap and a plan. So we do not work in a silo as a sports psychologist. We work in conjunction with everybody else that's helping support the athlete. So you guys are coming up with a physical recovery plan. We're coming up with a mental recovery plan, and we want to connect. I am never going to sit in a session with an athlete and not talk about the physical recovery plan, because I want to know what is the trainer doing and how are you supporting the trainer, so that I am helping them understand that they have to do their medicine, that they have to take their program seriously with you guys and with us as well, so that it's the mind and the body working together. So just like running through a couple of things that we do. So self-talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but that goes into mindfulness and grounding work. Lots of breathing, lots of visualization. We prep them before they're even on the field as to visualize how they're going to return to play and what that's going to feel like. Go through the plays that are going to be like, hey, you're going to hit your head. What is that going to look like? So that we start to regulate their emotions, we start to regulate their brain activity, and that the brain can start to calm down while they're physically getting reacted or impacted. Goal setting, we'll talk a little bit about that. So we use a lot of CBT, we use a lot of psycho-ed, and we work on the PTSD response, that's the fear response. And then a lot of this is that acceptance and gratitude, okay? Because they're in a place of depression, so they're not feeling good about themselves, and they're not feeling good about anything that's going on. And we kind of work on where they're at and how they can feel gratitude associated with the injury with their recovery. So goal setting, you ever heard of SMART goals? Set these goals, right? Small, attainable goals. Each day you want to see a little bit of an increase. The more that they can see a tiny bit of an increase, the more likely that's going to build their confidence, and that's the more likely that they're going to start to connect that mental component as like, okay, I'm doing well. I am recovering. It's going in the right direction. I think bigger goals in injury work can also, you can see a setback sometimes with them, and they'll slide back into that catastrophizing or that all or nothing thinking. And that makes them feel like they're winning, right? We talk about rehabbing together. So rehabbing on the field at practice, don't isolate yourself, right? Don't not go to practice if you can. I've worked with tons of like university athletes who we talk about getting them on the field or at practice when they are recovering, because it helps their mentality. It helps them emotionally still feel connected to the team. And then rehearsing plays with your teammates, that's another thing that we can do. We do that in our session. They can help do that with you guys as well. We watch game film, we talk about it so that they feel connected, right? The more that they feel connected, even while they're recovering, the likely it is that their confidence is going to stay balanced and stay strong, so that when they return to play, they're not going to feel like a stranger coming back into their team. Fixed versus growth mindset, right? That's what we're talking about. So we want to support a growth mindset instead of a fixed mindset. That there is going to be setbacks, that is going to be likely, but that you can work through those setbacks and get to your goal of where you want to go. So self-talk, I know I wrote positive, but I don't usually say positive self-talk. Self-talk is how we communicate with ourselves, right? We want to balance that talk. We don't want it negative. I don't always say positive, I say neutral. And I say don't put a charge to your thought, because once you put a charge to your thought, you're sitting in an all or nothing situation, and you're sitting in a potential situation that's going to make you feel negative, and that's going to decrease your confidence, that's going to increase your emotion and, you know, your depression, your anxiety, whatever you call it. So we can't control what others say about us, but we definitely can control the way we internalize what someone is saying to us, right? It's kind of like when you're driving and someone cuts you off. I can't control that they cut me off, but I can control whether I give them the finger or whether I like take a deep breath, right? So that's kind of how it goes. You become what you talk. You are what you tell yourself, right? So we want to give ourselves those positive, balanced, neutral messages versus those negative messages, because the more we talk positively about ourselves, the more confidence we're going to have in ourselves. And then talk kindly to your injury and to others that injured you. This is a huge piece that I know sounds kind of weird, but it's so true. I've worked with tons of athletes who are like pissed off that they've had the injury, but also really pissed off at somebody else who injured them, because it's a lot of like, someone checked me, someone ran into me, like it was their fault. And now you're placing this anger not only onto you, but onto this external thing that you cannot control, right? So we kind of work on just being kind to the injury, accepting and gratitude associated what this is, so that we can move forward. And then making this self-talk piece a part of your daily routine. It's very similar to, hey, your athletic trainer or your physical therapist has given you X amount of exercises to do at home. I'm giving you some exercises to do at home as well. And so now you not only have a physical recovery plan, but you have a mental recovery plan as well. Mindfulness is just that, staying present, staying grounded in the moment. We do a lot of breathing, visualization, and meditation. We're not gonna have time for me to go through this with you guys, but this is a breathing technique that is wonderful. We use it quite a lot in our office, and I use it all the time with athletes, non-athletes, all my patients. It's breathing in, it's called 478 breathing. If you Google it, you can find it. You breathe in for 4 seconds through your nose. You hold that breath for 7 seconds, and then you breathe out through your nose for 8 seconds. You do 4 cycles of that anytime you're stressed out, but most importantly, in the morning when you wake up, and at nighttime when you go to sleep. It's really, really good. You guys could even use it. I use it all the time. And so I would definitely suggest Googling it and kind of managing that within your practice. So one of the things that I wanted to get to was how to refer an athlete and what to pay attention to. So early intervention is key. I kind of really want to say that because I know it's hard to like send, you know, athletes to mental health counselors or sports psychologists, but early intervention is really important. When we see them early on in their injury, we can really help support them along the whole way. I think one of the biggest pieces for you to pay attention to, and like a red flag, would be if they are physically recovering and getting better, but like there's hesitation still there. Kind of like what I was talking about with the ankle piece. Like if you're starting to see someone like physically recover well, but like hesitation is associated with a lot of the things that they're doing, that potentially will mean that there's a mental block and that they may need more intervention mentally associated with getting rid of that mental block, because their body is saying they're ready, but something is holding them back. And that typically means that their mind is not connected to their body. Obviously, if you see increased depression, anxiety, irritability, a lot of times depression doesn't always look like sadness. It can look like anger, and anxiety can also look like irritability a lot of times. So those are things that I always say is really important. It's not going to always look textbook, and a lot of times in athletes, it's not going to look textbook. It's going to look more like anger or irritability, and that might mean that they're not ready because they're mentally still off. Fear. If you see them, hear them talking about fear, returning to sport, like, I don't know if I could do this, I'm not sure, or I don't think I'm going to go into that play, that is a big red flag, because mentally there's a block as well. And then constant rumination of thoughts and that negative self-talk. So if you hear them talking about the same thing over and over again, then that means that something is stopping them from moving past, like letting that go in a sense. And that means that they may go back to sport and they're not mentally prepared, and that might mean that they could re-injure. And then obviously if someone is like retiring from sport, that's a whole different game, and that definitely is a lot of grief and loss, and we definitely help support that as well. So these are just 2 really helpful hotlines if you ever need to talk to or give to someone you're working with. 988 is the 911 of mental health. And then Courage First is an athlete-only specific hotline that coaches, athletic trainers, athletes, parents can call up and speak to someone associated with athletics, and then they can help refer them out to someone like me in the community. And that is it. So, yes. Do you guys want to do the breathing? Yeah? Okay. I was just telling, when I walked in, my 3-year-old toddler did elbow me really hard in the nose the other night. Oh yeah, that was fun. So I'm a little stuffy in the nose, so I hope I can go ahead and do that. But if I don't breathe in through the nose all that much, that might be why. Yeah, it was pretty fun, actually, I will tell you. So speak of fear to injury, I put him to sleep last night, and this was me the whole night. I was like this in the bed because I was like, he's gonna whale me again. So it is a real thing. It is a real thing. All right, guys, so let me put this over here. Just some humor always. Okay, so everybody get a little bit comfortable, kind of like relax a little bit. I'm gonna walk you through it where we're gonna do it together, and then I'm gonna kind of like clap a little bit so that you could hear that rhythm. I do it a little bit fast. You could do it slow as well. However you want to use this technique, it's really just, it's like, you know, independently, like how you want to do it. But breathe in through your nose for 4 counts. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold for 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Breathe out for 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Breathe in. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Breathe out. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Breathe in. Hold. 2, 3. Breathe out. 2, 3, 4. One more time. Breathe in.
You are breathing out through the nose,
out through the mouth. Yes, sorry. Breathe in. Hold it for 7. And then breathe out for 8. Breathe in, hold it, breathe out. Yeah. So it's pretty good. The reason why it works, just so you know, is you're counting. So if someone's really anxious or like detached from their body, really what's happening is that as you're counting, you're regulating the brain and like the, you know, like the parasympathetic. So like that's what the breathing is doing. That's why I really like it, and that's why it works, because it grounds everybody to present moment and it kind of gets them back in. So, okay, thank you guys so much.
So thank you all for joining this morning. Glad you could be here to learn about ACL Return to Sport. We're going to talk about, as Becca said, more of the data-driven side of the equation. What is research showing us that is going to help those making return to sport decisions make the best decisions for their athletes and put the athlete's health paramount to help make sure they're as successful as they can be. So game plan for today. I do want to cover a little bit of the timelines that exist within return to sport testing. Hopefully everyone here understands that time-based return only without some type of objective testing is not a great idea. Hopefully that's why you're here, to learn what tests to do. But there's a lot of athletes still returning just based off time. So I'm talking about some of the reasons that's not a great idea, and some things that we can incorporate time with when to do the testing itself. Getting into the actual testing then, disclaimer, I'm not going to talk about all of it. There are hundreds of different tests that have been utilized to look at what's best for ACL return to sport testing. I'm going to talk about the ones that are most commonly seen, ones that have good, strong data associated with them, and go through some things that we're also saying, what might be some gaps in the equation? What are some things that are missing that we're looking forward to in upcoming research, both on what might be best tests, as well as what is there on the technological side of the equation, using force plates, using motion capture analysis systems. We recognize, and literature recognizes, that's not always the best option. We need cost-effective options, considering the number of athletes needing to have return to sport testing. But if finances are available, there's some cool things that apply. But I also want to talk about how you can use technology like your cell phone and free apps that can be done to help describe some of the quality of movement association as well. So I'm not planning on giving you the specifics of what you have to have in a return to play testing and return to sport testing, but more the principles and areas, and then talk about tests that fall underneath it, knowing that athlete specificity and sports specificity can play a large role. So first, like we said, there's a lot of athletes. Recent study, 2025, good number of athletes, almost 1,400 athletes, looking at returning to sport, how many suffered a re-injury of the knee, whether it is ipsilateral graft failure re-tear or a contralateral new ACL injury, 30%. It varies in literature, sometimes as low as 15, sometimes as high as 40, but it's still a lot. It's a very large number. So it just shows we need to have good testing mechanics in play. For anyone looking at this and being like, Paul, your math ain't mathing there, my guy. 30%, how did you get 30 out of 20 and 13%? 20 plus 13 obviously doesn't equal 30. This study looked at people 2 years post return to sport. So there could have been additional injuries outside of 2, but there's a 2-year look. Within the 2 years, 9% of the athletes that had an injury suffered both an ipsilateral re-tear graft failure as well as a contralateral tear. So we're talking a first, second, and a third ACL injury in the span of basically 2 to 3 years. Very depressing, right? Very challenging, very difficult, really showing why we want to have good testing in play to help to help decrease potential issues to the degree we possibly can. So, looking at timeframes, what is recommended? First study I have, and again, reference slide is at the end, and I very purposely chose only articles that I could get access to on Google Scholar so everyone can access them. If you have any trouble, email me. I have all of them saved and access to everything you could ever imagine. So we got it covered if you need it. First article is from something called the Panther Symposium. This specific year had 26 different experts from 18 countries. The experts were sports med physicians, surgeons, physical therapists, and sports med scientists. And those individuals tried to come together to say, what is the best return to sport testing and what is needed in literature to have improved outcomes there. Interestingly, one of their statements was you shouldn't return less than 6 months. That's aggressively early. I'm pretty sure all of us would say, yeah, we know, thanks, no kidding. However, they did take into account pro athletes, elite level athletes, all level of sport here. As they kept going down, they did also discuss 9 months seems to be a reoccurring, really important component of time frame for recovery. They showed a study talking about every month you delayed return up to the 9th month, there was a 50% reduction in each month from 6 to 9. Interestingly, so that study is the one right here, it's 2014, a little bit older study, but has some good data in it. Interestingly, when athletes took anywhere between 9 to 23 months post-return, time did not play a role. It was all physiological readiness performance testing. Before 9 months, though, we can see athletes prior to 9 months, 39.5%, almost 40% suffering a re-injury of one of the knees, either a contralateral injury or an ipsilateral injury. If they took greater than 9 months, that reduced to 19.4%. That's just time. That has nothing to do with physical performance or readiness. That is simply time. Also very nice, looking at return to sport criteria, for those who didn't pass the criteria they had, 38% had a re-injury. For those who passed their entire criteria, 5.6% had a re-injury. Much better, right? I will show you their exact protocol shortly, but I want to keep on the time train for a minute here. Again, 9 months, reoccurring theme, more recent study, 2024, things we're looking at here. This is a meta-analysis, so included all athletes, all level of performance. It's not a big difference, but again, average time to return for re-injury, 8.7. Average time to return for those without, 9.1 months. So just reoccurring theme of 9 months seeming to be a good time frame. It's one of the main reasons we recommend for our return to sport testing, it being at that 9-month marker to see where they are, then obviously send the information, send the data to those clearing for return to sport, so we're getting past that time frame. Within this, they also showed too, when they removed elite and professional athletes out of the equation, that distance and time grew a little bit further, about 33-day difference between the injuries versus the non-injured individuals. And as you kept getting younger, some articles talk about youth athletes as true, like 18 and under. Some talk about youth as in younger, 25 and under. This one, looking at youth 18 and under, was saying that those who made it to at least the 9-month marker had a 7 times decrease in injury rate. So again, 9 months, reoccurring theme, one of the reasons we chose to go at that marker for a lot of our testing. One of the questions on the registration also asked a little bit about time, saying, hey, what is the recommended time frame to transition to performance, to transition to another individual outside of the rehab setting? Obviously, there's a lot of variability that exists within that. You have insurance coverage, you have cost, you have all these different components. But assuming a perfect world, this was a nice little continuum that was from that same Panther Symposium. Talking about, you want to have, Becca's favorite word, collaboration with this. So we also know in Return to Sport, it's not like 9 months, you've passed, all is good, do your thing. It's a prolonged recovery. When we look at quad strength, there's more recent research coming out saying it takes up to about 2 years sometimes to get true symmetry of what we want for quad strength. I'm gonna go over hop testing in a little bit. Same thing, 2 to even 3 years depending on the hop test you're talking about. It takes a while to get to that true return to strength performance level that the athlete is looking for. So their recommendation, and their terminology is a little interesting. So return to participation is unrestricted training. Return to sport is returning to your level of performance, match play, game play, whatever it is you're talking about. Return to performance is saying, hey, that's gonna be, I'm performing at the same level I did previously. Some variability in how that's discussed. Some talk about repetition of significant statistics. Some talk about amount of time. The important component is this. When you're looking at it, saying this is about a 1 to 2 year process that you're continuing to improve. So there should be collaboration across all levels of team. Hopefully at the 9-month mark, you're passing the return to sport testing. Then as you move forward with performance, or even maybe starting performance a little bit earlier if needed, you're doing a couple of checkups to see, are you continuing to make progress along the line towards those goals, towards symmetry, to help the athlete get back to the highest level possible, while they're working with multiple individuals to get them back to their level. So, powered through a little bit of time stuff there. Let's get into the actual meat and taters of what we want to talk about, return to sport testing. Talk about some of the different protocols that are out there, then we'll break down the more principles or areas of each test, and then talk about specifics you can employ with your athletes coming up whenever you see them next. So, the study I talked about before that had the 5.6% re-injury for those who passed the criteria, this was their criteria. They have quad strength. This was just measured handheld dynamometry. Then they did single hop for distance, triple crossover, triple hop, and 6-meter hop. These hop tests are like the big 4. You will see these 4 hop tests over and over and over in literature. We'll discuss if they're maybe the best, but they are common components you're going to see. For all 5 of those, LSI was the indicator, limb symmetry index, where they're within 90% of the contralateral or the uninvolved limb was the threshold they were trying to reach. They also added the COAST, the knee outcome scale, subjective measure, as well as the global rating scale of perceived function. Both of those are scored on 0 to 100, 100 being complete unrestricted activity, 0 obviously then being the lowest score possible. They used a breaking point of 90. Makes it easy, right? 90 was everything. 90 for LSI, 90 for those tests. If the athlete scored a 90 on all 7 parameters, they passed. It's not easy, difficult. You had to pass all of them. Failing just one was a fail of it. Obviously, then you can focus on that deficit, but this was what they utilized. Let's move forward a little bit in time to continuing to move more recently. So again, that same Panther Symposium. By the way, they've had continued Panther Symposiums each year. I think last was 2024. I'm using this one because I liked a lot of information. And the most recent had Kevin Wilk as a speaker. And I'm going to talk about him in a minute and his thoughts. So different article for his components anyway. Like I said, 26 experts, 18 different countries, all 26, complete agreement, 1, time-based criteria, no bueno. Please don't use that in clinical practice alone. Use it in conglomeration or in conjunction with objective testing. Objective testing they wanted to see. Physical examination, but they get into some things I like, especially going into more of balance, neuromuscular control. You'll even see extremity and body. Getting into the equation of, hey, we know trunk control, pelvic control is a big piece of the equation, especially for like our female athletes. Trunk control is a significant indicator of potential ACL injuries in the first place. So it's not just saying, what's the amount of motion, what's the quality of motion that's happening, and how do we analyze those pieces of the equation? So the tests they recommended, your range of motion, your presence of effusion, inflammation, doing some laxity tests, the Lockmans and the pivot shift, quadriceps and hamstring muscle strength. Again, our big 4, we got our big 4 hops up there. Gotta love the big 4 hops apparently. Star excursion, interesting, the star excursion balance test does not have much literature that supports ACL return to sport testing. It is, however, very well validated as an indicator of potential lower extremity injury in general. So they recommended it, saying that this is a good thing to see how's the lower extremity injury potential, and more so, this gives us an opportunity to start looking at quality of motion. So it's not just the quantity of the reach, but what is their pelvic control? What is their trunk control? Are they getting too far forward? Are they losing something in the frontal plane? Gives us the opportunity to start assessing these things so we have the quantity and the quality piece of the equation we can take into account. Agility testing, they mentioned a lot, and they didn't give an example of it. They just said, agility test. Cool, that's great, thanks. But it goes into the idea of what's some newer research, what can we get into, how do we assess that agility piece? And they especially referenced a couple times the drop vertical jump test, particularly for our youth athletes. For those unfamiliar with this, drop off a box, land on both feet, immediate max vertical jump with that. Good for both the 18 under as well as the 25 and under crowds. Good indicator of potential health or success post ACL. So things they were getting into, starting to get more of the trunk, more of the body, more of the quality piece as well. Moving to, as I promised you, Kevin Wilk. So this is a 2023 clinical commentary. This is not research. This is what he recommended as a professional expert, are things we need to include. Within the study, or not study, sorry, within the article, he also talked about the quad strength, the hamstring, the hops, all those different pieces of the equation, normalizing strength to body weight, things like that. Talk about that in a minute. But he also got into saying reactive testing. Rebecca talked about the huddle a minute ago. Those of you who joined us for the huddle last year got to hear Molly Benetti speak, one of my favorite speakers there. For those unfamiliar with her, she's the head strength conditioning coach for the South Carolina women's basketball team. And if y'all want to see a record that is impressive as far as minimal time, game time missed for injuries over like a 5+ year span, it is insane what she and that team have done to stay healthy, especially in a sport where seems to be more and more injuries, more and more catastrophic injuries more frequently. She spoke regularly about the chaos of sport and training for the chaos of sport. Sport is not watching exactly what you're doing. Sport is incorporating all of the components happening around you, the unexpected, the unknown, the chaos of it. And Wilk was saying we need to incorporate that in our testing. We know when it comes to the rehab side, there's a lot of research around the neurocognitive piece of the equation for ACL return. Are we giving a neurocognitive load in addition to a physical load? Let's do some of that within it. The challenge here becomes, how do you standardize that? If something is random, how do you standardize random? That becomes difficult. Like the lateral slide test, he recommends 5 blaze pods, and you're doing lateral slides and tapping different blaze pods. Well, depending on what blaze pods light up, you might have a much greater or much shorter distance between them. So Torrey eventually will start talking about some of the things we've done to try to look at the quality piece of the equation. So we can incorporate that randomness, but not rely upon something like the number of touches that you have, because that's going to be hard to say, all right, well, you did 27 touches. Yay? We don't know what that actually means effectively. So, we talked strength, we talked hopping, we've talked the functional test, we talked reactive testing. Let's look at the specifics of what's recommended for it. It's quadricep strength testing. With quadricep strength testing, this is one of those areas that you're going to see in research a lot saying this is essential. A lot of times the experts will talk about if I had to pick one thing, knowing one thing's never the right option, if I had to pick one thing, quad strength is what I want to look at. One article discussed every 1% increase in the limb symmetry index corresponded to a 3% decrease in injury risk. So the idea there being like if I went from 90 to 95 in limb symmetry index, 5% increase, 5 times 3, 15, 15% decrease in injury risk. It's good, I'll take that. I like that a lot. Shows you each little gain can be really beneficial for you. Same study saying re-injury in quad alone, less than 90% LSI, 33% re-injury, greater than 90% LSI, 12.5% injury. So good indicator quad strength can help. I want to be very clear, there is research out there that says quad strength does not play a role. You're going to see both ends. I don't have time to go into all of it. A lot of the studies that have a not associated, they have time frames on return that are much earlier than 9 months, as well as overall weak quads in general, so they don't meet many thresholds anyway, which comes into the question of, is our testing too difficult, or are athletes not strong enough, period, hence some of the injuries happening in the first place. But that's a different conversation for a different day. If you want to email me on it, we can talk about it till the end of time. So, we have our quad strength, we have our hamstring strength as well. Hamstring strength Interestingly, there isn't any significant research talking about its just absolute strength indicating return readiness for ACL return to sport. However, there's good research on the ratio side of the equation. Keeping that 60% of your quad strength, there's good research showing that can help show athlete success. You'll also sometimes see the 1.5 to 1 ratio. So that being whether you're using newtons, kilograms, whatever you're measuring your force in, for every 1.5 units of force, there should be 1 unit of force of the hamstring compared to the quad. About a 67% strength for a hamstring compared to the quad. So good measures that we can utilize, and shows when we talk about the technology side of the equation, if you're going to invest in something, very beneficial to get into a force dynamometer. They can be very helpful for you. Not everyone can afford to get into force plates, get into 3D motion capture analysis systems, but a handheld dynamometer is coming down in cost and can be a very useful tool. There used to be a lot of ideas around the limb symmetry being 85%. Most has gone towards 90. Research-wise, you're going to see most commonly 60 and 90 degrees of knee flexion are the areas you're going to be testing in. We test at 60 and 90. There are some components that test at 30. The thought process there being strength through the entire range of motion, which makes sense. Plus, where's the ACL at greatest risk in terms of knee flexion, between 20 and 30 degrees. And if quad is weak, one of the common things we'll see, like with a cut, is that the individual won't be able to get as much knee flexion because they can't eccentrically control it. They increase their trunk flexion forward so they actually can elongate their glutes and use that as a decelerator. So you're in that 30-ish degrees of strength. So I want to see, do they have good eccentric control in the early range? That's the thought. There isn't much research supporting that, so we just use 60-90, but things you can incorporate if you want with your athletes. It's not that hard to do an extra test with it. Another component you can see sometimes too is the dominant versus the non-dominant leg. I'd encourage this being a bit more sport dependent. If you have an athlete who is very unilateral in their sport and has likely a good strength difference on one side versus the other, the question becomes, if the dominant leg was the injured leg, and the whole idea of limb symmetry index is saying, can I reach 90% of the previous performance? Well, if the non-dominant was weaker to start with, we're trying to reach a threshold that isn't quite what we need to be to do the dominant side, to let the dominant side do what it's been used to doing more frequently. So you'll see some people recommend the dominant side's the involved side getting within 95% of the non-dominant, and vice versa, the non-dominant side's involved getting 85%, because nothing's more frustrating than working your ass off for 9 months and then failing because it's the non-dominant side and your dominant side is extremely strong, and then you feel like I'm not getting anywhere. No, you're doing great. You're doing such a good job. We just have a very difficult threshold to reach. So things to consider with your athlete, take into account that might still be useful. Kevin Wilk talked about using body weight adjusted. We use this. I'm a big fan of this. Again, that question of, is our quad strength in the right place to start with, is a good, viable question to ask. Is that maybe why are there so many injuries? Are we not able to get our athletes not trained to the right strength in that component? So you can do a nice little test saying, what are some norms adjusted to your body weight? For this, looking at Newton meters per kilogram, easy way if anyone's unfamiliar with this. So we have 90-degree testing right here. You have your nice little force dynamometer measuring in newtons. The meters is our lever arm, so measure tibial plateau down to where the force is being delivered. Measure that in typically centimeters, like 40-ish centimeters is normally common component there. 40 centimeters in meters is 0.4. So you do your newtons times your 0.4 meters, whatever that length is, divided by the weight of the athlete in kilograms. Normalizes it out. What you'll typically see in literature there, return to run recommendation, at least 2 Newton meters per kilogram. Return to sport, a little bit more on the 2.5 to 3. There's discussion between 2 and 3 where they should be at, but measures you can utilize and again see not just how's the symmetry, but are they reaching certain thresholds to show they're ready for sport and the demands of sport. So a lot of things on strength, quad and hamstring, getting into hop testing. Like I said, we got our big four. We've got a big four in the limb symmetry index. They're frequently utilized. Things we're starting to see a little more frequently though. Hop test called the T-drill hop test. So you can still use the limb symmetry index here. For those unfamiliar with the T-drill hop test, it's basically the T agility test, except that instead of 10 meters, because that would be gross to hop for 10 meters, it's 10 feet. So you do 10 feet, hop forward, 5 feet, hop out towards the lateral side, hop back to the middle, 5 feet, back towards medial side, back to the middle, retro hop your way on back. Time that out, do a little limb symmetry index action there. Another option you can look at, because most of these hop tests are just going straight forward. Nice to see what happens when you start bringing in side to side into the equation, as well as potentially going into retro control. More recent meta-analysis, 2024 article. They were looking and saying, with the big hops, the single hop for distance, etc., what was the time frame to get back to full strength? A lot of the hops here were very consistent with that quad strength, taking about 2 years to truly get back to the symmetry we'd like to see. So again, reinforcing collaboration to keep helping the athletes get stronger and stronger throughout the entire process, not just that 0 to 9 month marker. What they actually showed was the last test to return to the symmetry we'd like to see was the vertical hop. So the last one took about 3.5 years to truly get that back to strength. Now keep in mind, this is meta-analysis. This is all sports. There are certain sports that vertical height is probably not predominantly important, so I could see where maybe that takes longer for those athletes. But it is a valuable thing to look at, saying what's the vertical hop equation, especially if you have a force dynamometer. A lot of cool things then you can do with that. I'm sorry, not force, sorry, if you have a force plate, my apologies. A lot of cool things you can do with that force plate. Take a look at trunk control, look at ground reaction force, where's ground reaction force coming up from. But if you don't, they even have a study to show, can you just use, again, your iPhone and one of the free motion capture analysis programs that are out there, and they said, yeah, actually it's very reliable to just have the system tell you how many frames it took them to go up and how many frames it took them to come back on down, and use that as a limb symmetry index, and then break those frames down to say, was there any valgus issue? Was there a pelvic drop component? Was there a frontal plane or sagittal plane shift in the trunk? Good, viable measures that you can utilize. They also got into the same article saying side hop, a valuable measure as well with limb symmetry index. Those unfamiliar, side hop, just your good old hop back and forth over a line, or 2 lines, you're hopping line to line. For the delivery of these tests, because one of the challenges has been, this is hard for athletes to pass. There's a lot of articles talking about how even healthy athletes with no injury have a hard time passing all of these tests, the criteria we'd like to see. So is that a fair barometer for our athletes returning from an ACL reconstruction? They did recommend that it can take up to 6 trials of each individual hop test to have performance balance out. For the single hop, triple hop, and the 6-meter timed hop, it typically was about 3 to 4, 2 to 3 actually, sorry, 2 to 3. For the triple crossover, it was 3 to 4, took a little bit longer. So the thought process here is, if you see your athlete continuing to have an improvement, there could be the learned effect going on there. So don't be afraid to go beyond that and do a 4th, 5th, 6th test, assuming time is available. We don't give that many trials normally, but it's a good thing to keep in mind. So again, we're trying to make our athletes be successful and making sure we take the learned effect into the equation. The exclusion here is the side hop. What they saw with that is if you did 6 attempts at the side hop, fatigue kicked in, and your athlete just didn't do good. So with that, they recommend just 1 rep of the side hop, which makes sense. It's a 30-second maximal effort test. We don't need to do that multiple times, and it seems relatively easy for athletes to understand that test. So we had our hopping, looking a little bit then into functional testing. Like I mentioned, you've got your drop vertical jump. Good thing in research they're starting to show, if you have like force plates, vault, things of that nature, things they've shown in research, you're at increased risk of injury. If there's an increased hip internal rotation moment, if trunk control is outside of where you want it to be, that includes also pelvic control, if there's genovalgus issues. However, if you don't have force plates, again, good old camera, using just motion capture analysis, especially as they come down, do their max jump back up. Are the knees staying an appropriate level apart? You can have some, obviously some controlled valgus is fine, but not uncontrolled valgus. Is it moving relatively symmetrical side to side? Is their jump coming out and landing? Is their jump Is their jump going out too far over towards the side? How is their trunk control? Are they flexed? Are they extended? Are they frontal plane deviated? Easy test to employ that we look at because it's something you can get some good quantity and more importantly quality information out of. Agility T-test. If anyone's wondering why I have quotes on agility, I can't possibly give a talk in the house that Brett Fisher initially came and helped create this amazing place, and then call agility something that is actually pre-programmed. For those that aren't familiar with the idea, agility, true agility is completely unknown, unfamiliar, you don't know what to react to, whereas the T agility test is a very known test. 10-meter run forward, 5-meter lateral slide, 5 and 5 back, and then middle and retro run. A good test, though, they've shown in literature, can be utilized, trying to get outside of just that front run, that forward anterior run, get a little bit of the lateral shuffle into it, getting some nice little eccentric control, deceleration. Can they decelerate appropriately, explode out of a cut into a lateral slide? And I did add norms up here. Some research just says anything under 11 seconds is good. Some gets a little bit different. I use the slightly more rigorous version. Within this, I recommend sport specificity as possible within some of your different potential functional tests. When Torrey goes over some exercises, he can talk about some ways we also add a bit of a neurocognitive load, trying to challenge that piece to think about if you have a wide receiver, they can't just run their route. They're running looking, does the corner have inside leverage, outside leverage? Is that zone? Is it man? Do I have to stop? Do I go? You're doing different things based upon how your opponents are going to be playing or whatever it is against you depending upon the sport. Getting into that neurocognitive load is a great way to analyze, especially if you're looking at the quality piece of the equation, doing a little motion capture analysis and looking for different things that might be a deviation for them. Because it's a nice article that talks about some of the common deviations with the trunk, with the lower extremity. Instead of having to find 8 or 9 different articles to talk about each different test and each different deviation, this is a good reference for you when you get it sent back out for things you can look for in your athletes and things we look for during our testing that might be a deficit that indicates there could be some type of injury potential for them. So then it gets into reactive testing, which, like I said, hard to measure, gets a bit of a quality piece of the equation, which instead of going in depth, I'm going to hand over to Torrey to talk about some of the different exercises and things that we do.
So, looking at that, while we're going through tests, I don't care what the test is, I will make observations, but I will also ask them, how does that feel? What are you experiencing? I'm not going to ask them, does that hurt or is that painful? Because it might be a different sensation. It might be, I just didn't feel stable. It might have felt a little stiff or it might felt slightly tight. So don't ask them a specific, ask an open-ended question. Capability. Are we looking at something that is, are they in control? Is it something where they're safe? And are we getting what we want from the test that we're performing? And lastly, the confidence component. So important. The thing about it is people don't feel confident because maybe you didn't set them up for success. They do this successfully. Now we are educating them. Once you do this, we're going to go over here because you're ready. Then we go over here. Then we go over here. So part of this end stage reactive testing that we went into was developed because patients would go back to their physicians and say, I feel pretty strong. I just don't know how I'm going to react when I go back out to my sport. If I'm playing football and I'm playing defensive back and somebody's making a cut, will I be able to respond in a fast way, in a safe way? I want to be able to perform. So we had to kind of take a look at what we're doing and get them as ready as possible to get back to their activity, minimizing risk as much as possible. Now we're looking at the time. We talked a lot about timing. And I work with people with all kinds of different ACL reconstructions or even bare implants. I work with physicians and a lot of them will take a look at that and say, all right, we have to look at time frames. That doesn't matter because sometimes they will have a meniscus repair and they're non-weight bearing for 6 weeks. Well, you're not going to start typically where, go, right? The ACL graft, I'm not going too far into the anatomy, but the highest risk of tear outside when they return to sport during the rehab process is about that 6 to 10 weeks. Why? Because that's when it's becoming biological. That's when it's getting a blood supply. So I'll educate the athlete. Guess what? It's kind of like putting a potato in the ground. And you got to wait for it to kind of spout and become a plant. That ACL graft has to get a blood supply. It has to become part of the system. Then you have to neuromuscularly train the system to be successful. So a lot of times physicians won't even let them begin jogging until 3 to 4 months post-op. Bare implant might be 20 weeks, depending on the situation. So they still have to go through the testing to earn the right to get to the next step, the next stage. So when they start going into impact, the strength is so important because they have to be able to absorb those ground reaction forces. Walking is different than jogging, that's different than jumping, that's different than hopping. And to clarify, what we speak about when we say jumping is going to be 2 feet takeoff to 2 feet land is a jump, okay? That could be a vertical jump. That could be a jump for horizontal distance. We say hop. In our nomenclature, we're talking about 1 foot takeoff to 1 foot land. So when we're taking a look at that double leg situation, they have a lot more confidence because they have the other leg to rely on. But you've got to start there. Once you go to hopping, whether it's an anterior hop for horizontal distance, maybe it's a frontal plane hop, that's a game changer. And if you've been working with athletes, you know that what's that confidence? The first time they go to hop, you're like, are you sure? Yeah, I'm sure. And we've got to look at what the variables are, okay? One of them might be what's their distance relative to their uninvolved side, limb symmetry index. The other aspect of that is what is the control. So they might go and they're going to have a beautiful control because they went 1 foot where they went 3 feet on the other side. So when we look at that, they had the ability to control that small distance, but they didn't necessarily have that limb symmetry index. All this is aggregate. You're trying to look at this as a cluster. You have athletes that are amazing compensators. So they might look good on one test, and then we take them over and we really isolate them, and we find out there's a deficit in that strength that is more significant than we want. We also look at, even though we talked a lot about that quad and we talked somewhat about that hamstring, those leg muscles, they're all friends. And if you have a deficit somewhere, it's going to catch up. It's going to cause a compensation. We want to mitigate that risk as much as possible. So although we might take a look at that quad, am I supposed to hit that button there to get it going? Somebody else want to run that? Thanks. Technology, that's why I work with the athletes. So when we look at that, we might test that quad and find out that they're at a sufficient strength that we can't ignore also. I'll take a look here. But it's really nice to have the technology to take a look at that and compare side to side. One of the things that Paul alluded to is we'll usually test at 60 to 90 degrees. And I don't get fixated if it's at 60 or if it's at 90. I found out kind of what the athlete's comfort zone is, and I stay through that through the continuum. Now, when do I start doing some of this strength testing? Commonly, it's going to be around that 3 to 4 month mark because I want to make sure that it's comfortable enough for them to load into that. And we're trying to know, are they ready to start maybe doing a little jogging, okay? And we start building on that. And I might test that about every month to see where they're at. Strength gains do not happen week over week. So it takes time for those tissue adaptations to take place. The other aspect of this is that we want to go and build on that. So those micro goals, right? Those mini goals. And so I try to do testing that gives them information. We're working towards this. Oh, look, we had a deficit in the quad. We have to work a little bit on that. But think about 3 planes of motion. I want to make sure that quad is strong in the sagittal plane, the frontal plane, the transverse plane. And if you don't know necessarily how to train on that, we'll be doing that here a little bit later. Another aspect of that is the glutes. The glutes are like the reins in the horse. We look at this, but if that knee is going to come into a valgus moment, those glutes, that glute max, diagonally, it's not boop, it's here. I tell people all the time, we're giving big back sides, not just for cushion, but for using, okay? So important. And it's really important when we're going to cut. So we do these tests to give us information. It's also hopefully motivating for the athlete, or maybe they're not where they need to be, and we can kind of kick them in the butt a little bit and say, you need to do a little bit more between sessions in order to be more successful. Hopefully I just hit return. Yeah, look at that. All right, great. So right here we have that reactive lateral slide test, which in this example, this is a baseball player, so we're tossing a baseball player to him, and it's a 30-second test. So when we're looking at this, one of the things we look at is there any type of difference in reactive time when they're cutting off the involved versus the uninvolved lower extremity? Another way you could do this if you don't have blaze pods, and I've done this when I've done it at other facilities, is you can take 4 cones, and then somebody might be tossing a ball to them. Basketball player might be a basketball, and they just tap the cone. And somebody will just say 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 1, 3, and they can holler it out, and therefore it's still reactive. Paul mentioned the difference between agility and non-agility. So for example, a pre-programmed change of direction could be a 5-10-5 shuttle run. They know where they're gonna go. Here, we're adding more of that mental side, that reactive side as well, of saying, okay, I'm gonna toss to you. Not only are you laterally shuffling, but you have to find that ball, which is more sport activity, just like you're gonna do. All right, I'm gonna run sideways. I gotta get that ball and control it. It's a great test. It does take a good video analysis as well. I usually do it slow-mo on my phone. So here we have an anterior hop for horizontal distance. This athlete is doing a tremendous job. She just gets in there and goes. So Paul also mentioned how many times do you do it? when I'm introducing this, because sometimes I've been working with the athlete for a period of time, I take over athletes at 3 months post-op, 4 months post-op. Sometimes I will get referrals when they're 9 to 12 months just for me to do this testing with them. Is I don't mind them actually doing some practice runs because I want them to be successful. It's not just going in here and say, oh, 3. I worked with an athlete here a while back and I asked her, have you been doing any jumping and hopping? Then I'd explain what that was. And she hadn't necessarily gone maybe as far as I'd hoped for where she was at in her recovery process. So sometimes you're just training them as part of the testing. The testing is the training is the testing. Don't be shy about that. So if it takes 3, if it takes 5, for me, it's not a big deal. I want accurate information. I want to validate that. And when I take a look at that, we're taking a look at the distance side to side, what's that limb symmetry index, and the other aspect of that is what's happening at landing. When they're coming in and they're able to control that valgus, is their trunk outside, unfortunately? And so sometimes I will just show them the video, come back and retest them and say, can you do this better? Once again, we are trying to help the athlete. We're trying to help them be successful. So part of that is training. All right, so I think this one we did okay. So this is the reactive T shuttle run. So in this example, what the athlete did is she ran about 5 to 7 yards, I will say left or right, and they have to cut. So I'm gonna take a look at how they are making that cut. Are they outside of that base to support? Are they way over here and they make that? We want them over. They're gonna be more athletic if they're gonna come here and they can be more agile. So in this response, being agile is your ability to instantaneously respond to an external stimulus. That could be the visual that we did with the reactive lateral slide, or in this one, it's gonna be more of a verbal as she's cutting about 2/3 of the distance, then side shuffling over to the cone, 10 yards side shuffle the other way, 5 yards middle, turn and go. And you time this. Now, the other aspect of this, I will take a look honestly side to side. So I will take a look at how they cut off their uninvolved side and their involved side so I can compare. That's what I like to do because, bear with me, maybe the other side doesn't look good as well. So I've got to make sure I'm taking a look at both sides. So we take a look at the quality or the control. We also look at performance. Again, although this is a test, use this as part of the training process. Okay, and there's other stuff there. All right, so looking at that, look at things in aggregate. If you only look at strength, you're gonna miss out on the opportunity to really understand how they respond to function. Because athletes sometimes are amazing compensators, don't just look at maybe a hop test and ignore the strength component of it. I've just seen too many that are one way or the other. When we look at time frames, I've had colleagues reach out to me and say, hey, so-and-so is supposed to be here according to our recommendation, but they're a little bit slower. So once again, looking at the mental component of it, hey, you're right where you need to be at this moment. We want to catch up on this. I'm going to help you get there. Give them the little nuggets that are going to help them be successful so that, once again, they don't feel defeated, they feel motivated. At the same time, you've got people that are really rocking it out and they're like, hey, I want to go do this. You've got to educate them on why they might need to wait just a little bit longer to go back because of safety. Thing about it is we look at like a Tommy John surgery, long recovery, but it's usually with people that are throwers, pitchers most of the time. We look at Achilles tendon repairs, relatively long recovery, more frequent than the Tommy John, but when we look at the ACL, the incidence is significantly higher. It's across a lot of different sports, and the recovery is significant. We do not want them to be one of the athletes that goes back and has another reconstruction. The time, the cost, the mental component, all of things play a role. Our job as trainers, therapists, coaches, mentors, we want to make sure that we are there coming alongside them. The other aspect is not only communication with the athlete, but as we get this information, are we communicating it maybe to the surgeon? Are we communicating with the trainer? I have an athlete right now, so after an ACL reconstruction when she got out of school, helped her through the summer. She went back to her school, and at that point in time, the trainer and I got on the phone. She came back at fall break. We did a few more tests. She's coming back over the holidays. I'm gonna do a few more tests. As we talked about before, this is a collaboration among the stakeholders. Do not feel pressured by some of the stakeholders. So you might have a situation where that parent wants him to get out. Guess what? They start in 2 weeks back at their club. Or you've got I got 5 minutes left, by the way, I'm almost done. Or you might have a coach that's a little bit more pushy in a situation. You are taking care of the athlete for their benefit. Once again, I'll go back. You want them to have the comfort, the capability, and the confidence to return to their sport safely, successfully, at a high performance. And if you're giving them these little nuggets along the way, giving them the test that shows their success, they are going to be capable and confident to go back to that sport. But it really does take testing. You just want to go, you look pretty good. No, you want to make sure you're showing them, and you're showing the physician, you're showing the stakeholders that they're ready to go back. There's a lot of things we do that help people get ready for these things. So if you want to stick around just for a few minutes, I'm going to do a real short circuit. I'll have a few volunteers if you're willing to. I know you've just been sitting for a while. I'd be happy to take you through that, because once again, what are some of the exercises you do once you find things? I'll show that to you. So I'm not sure if Becca wants to close, but I just say thank you for being here, because you're genuinely helping our athletes to move and feel better, helping them to return to the sport safely. So thank you very much. So most of the time it's the referral source that's recommending the athlete do the return to sport testing. So I will send that to not only the physician, our report, but also to possibly the clinical ATC or the medical assistant or the PA as well. I'll be honest with you, that the surgeons aren't always the ones that look at that. A lot of times it's the assistive staff. At the same time, I really like, if I get a colleague, I want to communicate with them. So if, let's say, Paul sent me a patient, I will get on the phone. Sometimes Paul will come and watch. I'm open to that as well. Once again, that's the athlete that Paul's been working with. I am just supporting that process to make sure that they're ready to go. If I have somebody else, I'm like, have your PT reach out to me, have your trainer reach out. It's a crapshoot. But you really want to try to communicate the best you can. Sometimes it's better to be the one reaching out, because not everybody's comfortable. They're like, once again, we are trying to do the best we can for the athlete. Some people have more of a willingness to be collaborative. And what we want to do is make sure we're just doing, once again, what's the best for the athlete in front of us. Thank you for asking that question.
When you get a question, can you just repeat it so that way the video captures it?
Sure.
Does anybody have a question? Please raise your hand and go for it. Does insurance cover this usually or not? Return to sport testing?
So the question was, does insurance cover this typically? And the answer is no. Unfortunately, private insurance typically does not cover this. Obviously, a professional athlete with work comp, yes, of course, but that's going to be the exception to the rule.
I've run into a couple ACL rehabs where the patient has a lot of femur internal rotation just naturally bilaterally. We're talking about knee valgus and control. So on someone like that who's trying to return to sport, how much do you harp on that if you're not getting that symmetry? It's not there bilaterally.
Yeah, right. Yeah, sure. I'll go back into kind of what I said earlier. There's some of that we're not trying to stop, we're trying to control. So we want to be able to accelerate and decelerate out of transformational zones so it keeps them safe. Don't ignore the ability, the reins on the horse back here. So are we training them in 3 planes of motion to help integrate that control and then test them? Once again, we have an uninvolved and an involved side. So even though you have somebody with trauma, you can compare to what their, quote unquote, their normal is. So at least you have a little bit of that LSI. At the same time, understanding the nuance of that situation when you're looking at kind of the control performance. Once again, are they in that safe zone? That's the most important thing.
To add, yeah, because it is difficult, right? They're just individuals whose body is just going to drive them into a valgus type of position, internally rotated type of position. To your question, I'm not going to harp on it to a great degree. I can't change certain things. I am not a fan of the whole knees perfectly over the toes, nothing changing. This is not real. It's not how it works, especially when you get into sport. To Torrey's point, go above and below. I'm also a really big fan of almost overtraining feet. I feel like intrinsics are often underappreciated. Foot control is very underappreciated. And if you have that individual that is naturally going to be diving in, we have to give them really good foot control as typically the first thing to hit the ground. Because if that's collapsing in quickly, you're screwed up the rest of the chain. Doing a lot of foot stuff can be massively beneficial, and just saying, all right, this is just who you are. Let's go above and below and give it as much help as possible, because it's not going to be biomechanically perfect, but none of us really are that anyway.
To complement that, I want to don't go too far down a slippery slope or rabbit hole, but we didn't have time to go over a lot of other nuances of that recovery process. So what Paul's talking about above and below is that if I don't have enough ankle dorsiflexion, for example, now that knee is going to be that next shock absorber 1, or I've got to compensate. I still have to have motion, and boop, there I go. So you talk about hips, don't ignore the ankles. When we look at that hip as well, or the thoracic spine where a lot of rotation occurs, we talked a lot about lower extremity, but if I don't have enough thoracic or trunk rotation, sometimes it's going for that ball, oop, there goes my knee. So don't ignore that top-down facilitation of mobility and control as well.
Do you have a movement control analysis app to recommend, or do you just do slow-mo on your phone?
Question was, do you have a movement control analysis app that you recommend, or do you use slow-mo on your phone?
So commonly, I will use just slow-mo on my phone, and then I will do that and look at that, bring it in. The other aspect, you can use different aspects like coach's eye and things like that that are helpful. But I'm also looking for the bigger rocks versus the pebbles over time. So you're looking at this cluster of tests, and that's going to help give you the best information. One thing I forgot to say is when we're going through some of these tests, and we're going through them, when I do end-stage rehab testing, return-to-sport testing, yes, we're doing all those tests. When I'm introducing like these hop tests, I'm not doing anterior hop, then frontal plane hop, and then we also do a transverse plane hop at 90 degrees as well, comparing side to side. I don't do all those in the same day. Once again, they got to be successful in the sagittal plane before I take them to the frontal plane, before I take them to the transverse plane. The other aspect is that anterior hop, I'm going to probably test them. If they come in later that week, I'm probably not going to do an anterior hop again because I don't think that's enough time. I usually test them the next week. But once again, has a lot of strength occurred between week 1 and this next week? No. But what you will see is that motor control improvement and that confidence. When I see that and I see a big change, a lot of that was the fear component where they weren't successful. Once again, practice. Don't just do a test and then I'm going to wait 4 weeks to do another hop. No, build on that. Maybe it's smaller hops, but it is something. The 6-meter timed hop that we talked about, it's validated in the research, but sometimes I just use that. I don't care how many hops it takes to get 6 meters. I just want to see you get there as quickly as you can. Once I see that be successful, then it's sometimes that triple crossover hop is better because that confidence, it's so important. Comfort, capability, and confidence. Okay, all that. Sorry, long-winded answer to your brief question.
That's a good question. Question is, if there's a screening tool that that athletic trainers or physical therapists can use that would be a good indicator of whether or not they should refer an athlete to us, to a sports psychologist. Technically, no. There's nothing that I'm aware of that you guys, I don't like to use. There's the PHQ-9 and the GAD-7. Those are, and they also have a PHQ-4 and a GAD-4, which basically I think would be the best thing that I can think of right now, which would only screen for depression and anxiety, but that could be a really good indicator if people, it's subjective, so it really has to be whether or not they fill it out correctly. An athlete could say that they are not experiencing those things, but you could see something different when you're actually working with them. And PHQ-9s and GAD-7s are used in the medical field, so even if you go to your primary care or your OBGYN, those are ones that are typically used. So I would say those two are pretty easy to access and easy to get. A lot of the other assessments, psychological assessments, you have to have an actual psych license for in order to give. But I think those two would be ones that I could say you could integrate into your work with them, because you could do a baseline when when they come in as to how much anxiety or depression they're experiencing in a 2-week period. And then you could kind of do a midpoint, and then you could even, as they're recovering, you could do those, and then you could kind of compare and see how they're recovering. And if they stay the same from when they came in, but they're physically recovering, you could be like, hey, like actually you're still showing me that you're feeling these mental health issues, but your body is sort of recovering. Like, what's that about? Maybe now it's time for a referral, right? So I hope that answered your question, but yeah.
Okay, we'll take one last question.
Sorry, no problem.
Appreciate all of you guys sharing. You guys valuable part in all this. I guess my question is more on confidence, because you mentioned the invisible injury, and I think confidence is one of those invisible factors. Besides maybe the perceived readiness to sport scale, just like the GAD, the PhD, like, is there anything you guys have seen from a confidence standpoint? I know reps and time, all the things we look into, but I can't help but think as an athletic trainer, as a strength coach, like that's the last frontier that we're kind of fighting, regardless of just throwing them in the sport. But like, is there anything objectively you're seeing, or any of you, as far as like that being a test and reassess, that we can add in each phase, early and late? Because I still go back and forth on that.
Yeah. Do you want?
Sorry, that was a long
No,
question.
that's okay. Do
you
you want to?
I can start with that.
Can you repeat the question first? All of it, the entire question.
So I will try to paraphrase, and please correct me if I'm mistaken. When we look at confidence, what are the ways that we maybe try to objectively measure some of that to understand their level of success and maybe how to progress them? So we have basically 8 phases of testing. We're just sharing kind of the 8th phase. So when we're looking at that, each component of that, as success begets success, we show them that maybe they're not there yet, and we work on strategies to help them get there. Once we test them and we show them success, hey, this is the next step, and it builds. So part of it might be the jumping we talked about, which are small jumps, either horizontal or vertical. And then we say, okay, you're good. Now we're gonna start with little mini side hops, just this little hop. All you gotta do is 1 little inch. Okay, guess what? Now we're gonna go into a little bigger hop. Everything builds on it. So they have, the first time they do that, they don't have the confidence. Let me be honest with you. And so that's why they're sitting there going, you've done, if you've worked with athletes, you know that what I'm talking about. And then the next time they do it, they might have a little less of a pause. They're a little bit better with their distance. They're a little bit better with their control. And once it gets that at least 90% LSI, now I take them to that next thing. So it is part of that where I am testing them. Part of this is why so many people maybe get re-injured, because they're not, we talk about insurance, maybe they're not getting the end. We got to help them get there. Be creative with our strategies, at our frequencies, understanding the different challenges they have with life and financial and different things like that. But it's a great question. Yeah, you have to show them they're successful.
Yeah, and I would just add, from a mental health perspective, I love all of what they're saying, because to connect to providers who are working with athletes who believe in that kind of stuff, that's where the athlete's going to even get the best wraparound services, right? So really connecting, reaching out. I love that you said that, because we do that all the time. We're always the ones that are getting release of information, so we could reach out to the PT, the AT, the physician, psychiatrist, whoever it is that's working with the athlete, because that's the way it works. Because this way, then we're working on. So as he's sort of talking about, doing those physical activities and gaining that confidence, we're doing that with the mental piece, right? In the session, we're saying, okay, well, tell me about your practice today, or tell me about your training session today, tell me about the rehab training session today, and then we're working on like going through the psychological components of that. So we're saying, hey, last week you told me you couldn't even make that jump all that way, but now you're telling me you are. That's awesome. Let's talk about how you're feeling about that, and let's talk about that's building that confidence. And then I'm giving them the homework that they need to do outside, and while he's giving that, or they're giving them the homework physically that they need to do. So I don't know, it's like time. I think that's the biggest component, that like you have to stay with them and educate them on the time that that it takes to recover, both physically and mentally. I love that you said about the parent piece. Like, don't let other people kind of get in your way of training your athlete and what they need, because individually, each person is going to need tweak a little bit of what you know is helpful to them. So.
And to complement that as well is, think each session is an opportunity, just like every practice is. And so I've had circumstances where I have a plan. I'm going to go in and maybe I'm going to do some strength testing with them. And I just found out that they're having relationship troubles and they're just mentally not there. I'm like, okay, I'm glad you're here. We're going to wait. Sometimes you just got to get them set and ready for that day, and I'm going to postpone that test to another day. Or they just got back last night at midnight from a trip, or they just did finals, right? You understand where they are, and sometimes I've made the mistake. I do the test, and I'm like, ooh, that wasn't as good as they want. But then I just get, obviously you got back at midnight last night, it wasn't what we want, hey, we're going to test that next time. And then I show them, oh, look how much better you are. So that timing of it. The other thing I'll do is when sometimes an athlete comes in, I'm like, hey, you ready to go today? And they're like, yeah, let's go. I'm like, good, I already know they're probably mentally ready to go. If I get that, I slept like crap last night. Okay, how do I maybe modify that day to help them be successful? How do I maybe find out what's going on a little bit more to make sure that I understand kind of their mind, body, spirit, what their comfort, capable, and confidence can be on that day? So, once again, asking good questions before you even get started is going to be so important to set them up and set you up for success, not only with testing, but with a rehab day. Thank you.
Okay, so a few things. I just want to remind everybody, in case you don't know, so in the state of Arizona, AIA, which runs most of the high schools here, only ATs, physicians, nurse practitioners, PAs can return athletes to sport. So when we talk about the return to sport testing that we do here with our physical therapists, this is a reminder, as Torrey talked about, it's collaborative. We are not saying to your athlete, oh yeah, you can go back, because that's not what physical therapists in the state of Arizona are allowed to do. What we're doing is providing objective testing to help you make that decision. That's why we love when an AT, I mean, if I got a physician out here, that'd be awesome, but rarely are we gonna see that. But if an AT wants to come and see the testing that Torrey is doing with your athlete, we love that because we want that collaboration. But regardless, you will obviously receive the objective testing from Torrey. Torrey is not gonna sit there and tell your athlete, like, yeah, you can go back, because we understand as a physical therapist company, like, that's not our role in the return to sport. That being said, also understand, like, in the collegiate setting, it's likely also the AT and the physician's decision there, and also the pro setting. So that's why collaboration is so important. I think sometimes people don't know, like, always who actually has the final call. So I just want to make sure, as an athletic trainer myself, I cleared that up. As I mentioned, you will get the recording, so give my videographer here, Andrew, just like a week or so, and then you'll get an email. You have to fill out a survey, and then you'll get the certificate. So for ATs, 12/31, I know all your con eds do. We will definitely get it to you before then. I make that promise to you. If you need to leave, like I said, we're very sensitive to time. It's totally fine. We said today was going till 10:30. By all means, thank you so much for coming. Grab coffee, donuts on your way out. We'd really appreciate it. But if you have time, Torrey is going to take some time over here for about 10-15 minutes just to talk through some exercises that you can give your athletes if you notice that there is some testing that they're struggling with. So thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your weekend.